Hello, everyone. We are starting the webinar and welcome this lovely Friday afternoon in New York City. We do have the sun, even though it's a little chilly here, but I'm sure we're welcoming people from all around the world. In the chat, as I'm going to do my introductions, please tell us where you're calling from. And we are going to get started. Thank you very much for joining us for to discuss one of the most fundamental questions in the workplace, especially today. The question about how leaders can can create the culture of mattering in the workplace. And the workplace of today is pretty turbulent. So we could not ask for a better guide to this project of creating a workplace that matters than Dr. Zach Mercurio, whom we're very happy to welcome from Colorado State, where he is a honorary fellow at the Center for Meaning and Purpose. And the way I met Zach, very welcome, Zach, to NYU, was actually at NYU. At the Stern School of Business, we have our own initiative for purpose and flourishing. And that's where, for the first time, I heard Zach present his research. And at that time, his forthcoming book, The Power of Mattering: How Leaders Can Create a Culture of Significance. So I was so fascinated by his approach to this topic that has been discussed in so many different contexts that I thought that we will all benefit from this conversation. So as always, what we're going to do is to have Zach present. And then please put your questions in the Q&A tab. And we will absolutely leave time for a discussion with the audience. Zach has generously agreed to answer most difficult questions about this particular project that we all are engaged in. And so without further ado, Zach, please take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Anna. I'm glad to be here, and I'm glad that so many of you are spending your Friday, your rare time on a Friday, talking about mattering. Let's start at the beginning. I mean, let's do a thought experiment. Nobody would be here if at some point in our lives we all hadn't mattered enough to another human being to keep us alive. That need to be important to other people is a primal survival instinct. And it never goes away. That survival instinct to matter starts from the moment we're born. I remember when my first son was born and I met him in the hospital room. I remember reaching down into this bassinet and his little tiny hand reached out and grasped my index finger very tightly. And I didn't realize it then, but as I started studying mattering, I realized that I was experiencing 6 million years of fine-tuned programming that directs us from our first action as human beings to reach out and grasp to be significant to somebody. So it is our first primal instinct. Now, as we grow up, as we go to school, as we go to work, that instinct to matter to someone else turns into the fundamental need to feel seen, heard, valued, and needed by them, to have somebody pay attention to us, to have somebody see us, to have somebody affirm us, to have somebody show us that we're needed. And that basic need is present in every occupation and every generation. For example, raise your hand metaphorically if you'd prefer to feel insignificant at work. Whether you're a baby boomer, a Gen Xer, a Gen Z, or whatever generation name there is next, nobody's probably saying, yeah, me, I'd prefer to feel unimportant because I'm a baby boomer, right? It's only those Gen Zers that want to feel seen, heard, valued, and needed. No, this is a uniting human need to feel seen, to feel heard. And it starts as a survival instinct, turns into a fundamental psychological need, and is a universal longing. Now, so when that need is met, when that instinct to matter is met, when we reach out and grasp and someone grasps back in our relationships, we experience what psychologists call mattering. And mattering is the experience of feeling significant to those around you that comes from feeling valued and knowing how you add value. In the workplace, mattering is feeling significant to your peers, to your leader. That comes from feeling valued by them and knowing how you add value through your work, through your inputs, and because of you as a unique human being. Now, it's very important to make some distinctions before we go on today. Mattering is different from things like belonging or inclusion, which have been well covered, especially over the last decade. I'll use an example from my kids' drama right now, which is recess drama. I have two elementary school kids. They started the semester, so recess drama is top of mind, and who gets picked for sports teams at recess is top of mind. And so I'll use an example from that. Belonging is being picked for the team. Belonging is feeling welcomed, accepted, and part of a group. Inclusion is being asked to play in the game. Inclusion is being able to take an equitable, active role in a group. But mattering is feeling that the team would not be complete without you. Mattering is feeling significant and important to people in the group. So belonging is feeling part of, mattering is feeling important too. This is very important because I can feel that I belong in this webinar. I can feel welcomed, accepted, connected. I can feel that I'm included. I'm able to take an equitable, active role right now in the webinar. I feel represented here. But I could have no one notice that I have a parent that I'm a caretaker for, or that have no one notice and name my unique gifts or strengths relative to anybody else here. I may not ever have anybody be able to name how I'm uniquely needed, what's missed when I'm gone. And that's where mattering comes in. Mattering is an interpersonal experience. It does not happen through programs. It does not happen through initiatives. It does not happen through perks. It happens through interactions, interactions in which we feel seen, heard, valued, and needed. And just like it comes first as human beings, it comes before pretty much everything we say we want in our organizations. If I were to summarize the work motivation research from the last 50 years, I could probably summarize it in one line. It's almost impossible for anything to matter to a human being who doesn't first believe that they matter. It's hard for anybody to care if they don't feel cared for. And so the way mattering works through these two components, feeling valued and adding value, theorized by psychologist Isaac Prelotensky, is when we feel valued, when someone sees us, when someone hears us, we develop two self-beliefs that Joyce Bono and Timothy Judge find most predict performance. Those two beliefs are self-esteem, I'm worthy, and self-efficacy, I'm capable. The number one predictor of both of those are verbal reinforcement and supportive relationships with others. So when we get those reflected appraisals that we're valued and that we have some significance in a team, we develop these beliefs. I'm worthy and I'm capable, self-esteem and self-efficacy. This gives us the confidence needed to add value, making a difference, contributing. And the more we see how we're contributing and making a unique difference, the more a leader illuminates that for us, the more we feel valued. And that's the upward spiral we see when organizations and teams and families and communities and classrooms commit to cultivating interactions in which people feel that they matter. The result is increased motivation, resilience, well-being, and performance. A lot of people say to me things like, Zach, how do I get my new employees to develop more confidence? Or how do I develop more confidence? I've been thinking a lot about this lately. Confidence is not developed through sitting in our office chanting self-affirmations to ourselves and reading self-help books. True confidence is when we can go out, try, fail, experiment, take risks, and learn because we know someone has our back. We know we already matter enough to somebody. We have that secure base from which we can launch out. Psychological safety, for example, many of you have heard that term, that theory. I think it's mattering in disguise because what psychological safety is knowing that we matter enough to somebody else, so much so that we can go out, we can speak up, we can share our voice, we can innovate because we know someone has our back. It is hard for people to contribute if they don't first believe they're worthy of contributing. It is hard for people to use their strengths if they don't first believe that they have them. It is hard for people to share their voice and their ideas if they don't believe their voice and ideas are significant to us. It's hard for anything to matter to someone who doesn't first believe that they matter to us. Here's why this is important. For so long in the work world, we've had this subconscious notion that people should be valued once they add value. But psychologically, it's the opposite. People need to feel valued in order to add value. So what's going on right now? Well, I would argue that we are facing a mattering deficit. that's masquerading as symptoms of disengagement, loneliness, and isolation and underperformance in work. Let's look at the first symptom of this mattering deficit: disengagement. Gallup has been measuring engagement for years. In January, they found that it was at its lowest rate in a decade. Just 7 out of 10 of us would be emotionally uninvested in our work if we were an organization together. This is despite over $1 billion spent on employee engagement initiatives, despite over 100 validated surveys on measuring engagement, despite well-being programs, DEI programs. Wages actually have increased 42% across every sector in the last 8 years on average. The rise of perks culture, yet we're still disengaged. Why is that? There's two data points that were sort of buried in this survey report. One is that this is the lowest this has ever been. Just 39% of that sample strongly agreed that someone at work cared for them as a person. Just 30% said they strongly agreed that someone saw and invested in their unique potential. You can't solve this through a program, a perk, or an initiative, right? You can only solve this through a relationship. So what's happening, and the solution to disengagement resides at the interactional level, where people are seeing, hearing, and valuing other people. You'll see this in other data. American Psychological Association finds that about 65% of people feel underappreciated or undervalued in work. WorkHuman in 2024 found that 30% of people, 3 out of 10 people, say they feel quote unquote invisible or ignored in a self-report survey. And 8 out of 10 people, according to the American Psychiatric Association, say they feel lonely in work. One of the things we've gotten wrong, especially in organizations about loneliness, is we think the opposite of loneliness is connecting more. Typically in organizations, what we do when we hear about a loneliness epidemic, we add more meetings or events. Meetings have nearly tripled since 2020 in the average organization. We are on more platforms than ever for connection. The average US adult right now sends 30 to 40 text-based messages a day. As we're having this webinar, you may be one of them, there are 38 million people right now firing off messages to each other on Slack. We're actually more connected than ever, but we're lonelier than ever. And why is that? Well, researchers find that the opposite of loneliness isn't having more people around you. The opposite of loneliness is feeling that you matter to the people around you. So it's not the quantity of interactions that matters. It's the quality of interactions that matters. It's not social contact that predicts low loneliness. It's perceived social value to others. And what's happening is that we're having lower quality relationships than ever. So I don't think we're facing a mattering disengagement crisis. I don't think we're facing a technological addiction. I don't think we're facing a loneliness epidemic. I think that what's beneath it is that more of us feel overlooked, unseen, unheard, undervalued in our daily interactions than ever. And here's what happens. Research shows that when people feel that they don't matter, there are two behaviors that result. They either withdraw or they act out in desperation. Quiet quitting, for example, when that career coach on TikTok posted that video and said, hey, if you have a job you don't like, just do the bare minimum just to get by. And then that went viral. Quiet quitting, or lying flat in China, this is where people were taking pictures of themselves lying on their beds, renouncing work. The quiet quitting and lying flat movements were not the result of a lazy, entitled generation. Right. They're the inevitable withdrawal response to a human being who feels insignificant or unseen by society or an organization. Other withdrawal responses, feeling isolated and withholding information, silence. The terminal withdrawal response, we've pleasantly termed turnover in organizations, is leaving. I mean, think about what you do in any relationship where someone doesn't remember anything about you. They never check in on you. They never affirm or name a unique gift that you have. They never show you how you're uniquely needed or that you're adding value to their lives. Think about what you do. We either withdraw, or it can be much louder. We demand attention. We act out in desperation, complaining, blaming, gossiping, acting out, protesting. A lot of these toxic behaviors in organizations are really the language of the unheard and the unseen. Negative workplace gossip, for example. A lot of people think people who gossip, the number one predictor of that is just that they're a bad person and they want to cause trouble. But gossip is actually predicted by what's called psychological contract violation. So my expectation of fair treatment from you has been violated. So I'm going to go find someone to speak out to because I can't speak up to you. I will do anything to find someone who I matter to, even if it's on negative grounds. even if it's based on gossip or blaming or complaining. Because again, that primal instinct to be able to reach out and have someone reach back, to have that relationship is so primal that we act out often in desperation to try to get the attention or the mattering that we're not getting in other areas of our organizations. I introduced that to you because not every behavioral issue, obviously, is a symptom of not mattering, but many are. Many of the most difficult, quote unquote, employees that I've been asked to work with in my practice also tend to be the most unseen, unheard, and undervalued employees when you really get below and beneath the surface. So, what do we do? Well, mattering has two components, we find feeling valued and knowing how we add value. We feel valued when people know our full name, when they remember details about us, when they check in on us, when they know our struggles, when they see and hear us. We know how we add value when people show us the impact that we make, when people can know and name our unique gifts, when people ask our opinion or give us responsibility or show us how we're needed. And inevitably, there's got to be someone here, I hope none of my colleagues, who are looking at this slide being like, Zach, why do you have a job? Why do you research this? I mean, you should be able to give the shortest webinar in NYU history and come on and say, hey, be a good human at work. Done. Drop the clicker, leave. Why? What's going on? Well, how many of these things made it on your to-do list today? How many time blocks are on your calendar to check in with a colleague who was sick last week and missed a meeting? How many of you all know your delivery driver's first and last name and what's important in their lives? Right? Often we rely on intuition to be a good person instead of practices and skills and habits. But intuition doesn't scale. It doesn't scale in our lives. It doesn't scale in our organizations. Practices, skills, and habits do. The problem really is that common sense is not common practice. And there's a reason why common sense is not common practice. And before I get into some of these practices that you can take away to turn this into common practice to restore people's sense of mattering, um, it's important to be aware of the barriers we're all up against. And I'm including myself in here. I research and teach what I need to hear the most. So there are some barriers that are getting in our way right now. The first barrier is what's called social skill decay. So, for example, you've heard a lot about our phones. And for the last 25 years, we've been sending text messages for about 25 years now. For the last 25 years, we have been able to get out of the social situations in which we would otherwise normally learn how to see, hear, value, and show others how they're needed. For example, if Anna gives me some bad news, I can now go on Slack or send a text message with a sad-faced emoji and just say, oh, I'm sorry to hear that. I actually don't have to sit with Anna, seek understanding, show compassion. Every time we get out of that situation, we actually lose the skill to show compassion, to hear somebody. That's why I don't believe that the solution to disconnection is putting down our phones, because we have to know what to do when we put down our phones. We have to rebuild the skill set that we've lost. Let me give you an example of this. Just look at this is from the US Bureau of Labor's time use survey of Americans. Look at the amount of time spent actually interacting with another person in real time since 2003 in every age group. A skill can decay in about 4 days of not using it. There are many people out there, maybe people leading teams, who have never had to show compassion to a real person in real time in the last 5 years, for example. So one of the things we all have to contend with is that as we've relied on digital communications to communicate with each other in short transactions through all of these platforms, even recognition now we're able to give via a platform, we actually lose the skill to do it. So we have to start really thinking about these as common practices and relearn these skills. And this is probably why the World Economic Forum's top in-demand skills by 2030, you saw things like curiosity, active listening. Um, there, for the first time, almost half of those skills were human skills, not technical skills. So this rebuilding of these human skills are needed. The second reason why there's a mattering deficit is attention fracking and depletion. Psychologist Gloria Marx finds that about 10 years ago, our ability to pay attention to one thing without being pulled away by a distraction, our average time span to do that was about 2.5 minutes. That doesn't sound bad, but that's pretty good. I mean, 2.5 minutes without being pulled away mentally. Now, she repeated those studies a couple of years ago. It's about 47 seconds on average. There are more things pulling at our attention as leaders, as workers, as humans than ever. And so that results in us not being able to be present to the people that are in front of us. So we have to relearn that skill. And then finally, we've minimized soft skills for the last 50 years. Anytime our brain sees something as soft or simple, we approach it with less rigor. It's called our overconfidence bias. And so I believe that what we need to do is really approach leading people with that foundation of mattering, approach it as a separate occupation. Leadership is a separate occupation that requires a separate set of skills. And we need to rebuild those skills in ourselves and others. And the good news is that we can. And that's what our research has focused on, codifying the skills needed to create daily interactions in which people feel significant. So the best way to do that as we launch into our practices is to reflect on this yourself. So I want you to think about when you've most felt that you mattered to someone else in your work. And I want you to think very specifically, what did that person do? What did that person say? And then what skills did they use? And I'm going to give you about 30 seconds of awkward Zoom silence time to reflect on this question. And if you would, type 2 to 3 words in the chat that describe what that person did for you. So think about when you've most felt that you mattered to someone else in your work. What did that person do or what did they say? What skills did they use? And type 2 to 3 words in the chat that describe what they did. Thank you, Nikki, for going first. Acknowledged my work and its impact, specific and detailed in what I did, remembered, checked in, talked, asked my opinion, intentional, specific example, got to know me, asked for my thoughts, I appreciate you, listened with intention, listen, not interrupt, we're candid, transparent, vulnerability, good, asked my opinion, asked about a family issue I was dealing with. Manager went beyond work and helped guide me in personal areas such as financial advice and real estate advice. Love that. Checked in around a difficult issue. This is a good one, Joanne. Pulled me into meetings I wouldn't typically attend just so my voice was in the room. Supported my thoughts, guidance, publicly acknowledged my work. Okay, notice how nobody wrote when I got my direct deposit or when I got that big promotion or when I got that big award or when my company announced their new hybrid remote work policy in that well-worded email or when my leader got a great product launch or quarterly earnings report. This is what we find time and time again. That mattering happens in moments. It happens in interactions. It does not happen through big actions. It happens through small interactions. And as you're looking at some of the data that's coming in the chat, this is the data that we've seen when we've asked thousands of people when you most feel that you matter at work, what are people around you doing? And there are 3 qualities to a moment of mattering. We feel that we matter when we're noticed, when we're uniquely seen and heard. We feel that we matter when we're affirmed, when people know and recognize our gifts and show us how those gifts make a difference. And then we know that we matter when we feel needed, when we feel relied on, and indispensable and essential. So the remainder of our time right now, before we get into Q&A, I'm going to give you some skills and practices that we've observed real leaders doing in real relationships to help people feel noticed, affirmed, and needed. Now, there may be other things that you already do. And what I'm hopeful is that this will help name it, because when we can name something, we can invest in it. It moves from common sense to common practice. And also when we can name something, we can change it. So we've identified over 25 skills under noticing, affirming, and needing. I'm going to give you like 3 or 4 per area right now that you can immediately take and do something about. And here's what's great about this. You don't have to wait to start doing anything from this webinar. Every single one of these actions is available to you in your next interaction. When we ask people what makes their leaders great, we really find that a leader's next great leadership action is really their next interaction. It's what they do for the next person they interact with. And that's always in our control. What's very powerful about this is there's no red tape to caring. You don't need your organization's permission or approval to show up in your next interaction and show someone that they're noticed, affirmed, and needed. So let's jump in. The first practice area is noticing people. Noticing someone is different than knowing them. You can know your best friend but not notice that they're suffering or struggling. Noticing is the deliberate act of paying attention to the details, ebbs, and flows of someone's life and offering an action to show them that they're thought about. In the chat, I saw someone say someone remembered a family issue I was going through and checked in on me. That loop of remembering somebody, observing somebody, and then checking in, that is a practice and it's a skill. One of the first skills we can use to do it is have some process of observing the details of people's work and their lives, of noting down what you observe and making sure that you schedule time to share back and check in on what you observe. I'll give you an example. I got to work with a distribution center. They scored really low on their employee engagement surveys, except for one team. And I love outliers. So I went to this team and I said, hey, what do you do here? Every single person on the team said, oh, it's our supervisor. We just love her. She just gets us. And so I went to her, and this is really difficult work. She has a big team, 27 people. I went to her. I said, what do you do here? And she very calmly said to me, oh, Zach, let me show you. She pulled out this old notebook. She said, on Friday, I write down each of my team members' names, and I write down one thing I want to remember about them from this week. She said it takes me about 10 minutes. If a piece of equipment wasn't working and she said she'd get it fixed, she'd write it down. If she noticed that one of them was going on vacation, she'd write down where. If she noticed someone was nervous about a meeting with someone else or was having trouble with a team member, she'd write it down. And on Monday morning, she goes, this is how I start my week. I ground myself, I look at this notebook for 10 minutes, and I schedule a 3-minute interaction across the week with each of them. And I say things like, I remembered last week this equipment wasn't working for you. Did we get that fixed? I remembered last week that you were nervous about that meeting. How did it go? And I remember she told me, she looked at me, she goes, Zach, the one lesson I've learned from being a leader on a distribution center floor is that there's magic in being remembered. And I love that. But what I love more about that is she had a practice. She had a practice. She didn't leave it up to chance. I'm not asking you to go keep a personal logbook on your people if that's not your style. I am asking you to have some practice to retrain your attention, to remember the details of the people around you, and make sure that you're checking in. For example, I'm not really a journaler, but on the top of my meetings that I have with people, I write down, don't forget to ask about ... at the top of my note sheet. What this does is just triggers me to ask about something, a project a colleague was working on, something that was going on in their life. And I typically say, hey, I just, I wrote this down. I wanted to ask you about this. And you should see what happens when someone feels remembered. So have some process to observe, note, and share back the details of people's work and their lives. This is not about being people's best friends, understanding people's deepest, darkest secrets. This is just noticing the details that you see. It could be all work related, but that noticing is key. One way to be a better observer is to simply ask questions that give you the data to notice people. Oftentimes I hear leaders ask questions like, how are you? How's it going? Or a leader will start a meeting and say, how's everybody doing? Good? Could you imagine if you weren't good? Would you say, not me? Or people will say, hey, I hope you're doing well. Great leaders who are great noticers, in my observations and in our research, go beyond the greetings. And they're very skilled at asking questions that people can actually answer. There are 3 characteristics of a really good question we found. They should be clear, not vague. So what has your attention today? The reason why I can answer that is because there's an object, my attention, and today there's a time frame. What have you been struggling with this week? What are some log jams on that project? How can I remove them? Make sure your questions are open, not closed. So how did the meeting go? Or was the meeting good? Those are closed questions. You can get a good or yes or no answer. Hey, what was the most interesting thing in the meeting that I should know? Is an open question, allows them to share their expertise with you. And then finally, ask more exploratory questions than you do evaluative questions. This one's very sneaky. It's sneaky for me as a parent as well. Evaluative questions are any question in which we have the power to judge the quality of someone's response. What's the update on that? What's the status on that project? Is that going to get done by Friday? It's like asking my kid when he comes home from soccer practice, did you hustle at practice? Do you think he's going to be like, no, Dad, I did not? Probably not, right? When we ask evaluative questions, we put people on the defensive, and they will give you a self-protective answer. But I could ask him, for example, hey, tell me about an effort you're proud of at practice. And I get the same data. Tell me about a project that you're trying to get done for Friday that I can help remove some log jams on. We get the same data, but we give the power back to the person. A good test for this is that if you have direct reports, And if you called them out of the blue right now, what would their first reaction be? There was a woman in a workshop last week who just blurted out terror. And I said, what do you mean? And she goes, well, I think they'd be anxious. If that's so, the problem is not that you're a bad leader. The problem is that you've probably had more transactional interactions with them than transformational interactions. Transactional interactions where you're asking them for something or you're telling them what's wrong with something versus asking what you can do for them and how they are doing. A great way of being an observer is to also check in on energy and emotions. Energy and emotions in work are not noise. We've treated them like that for 50 years. They're actually data. There was an eye hospital in Denmark that was having trouble with patient satisfaction scores. Engagement was low. Nurses were highly burned out. And researchers wanted to look at what's the most high impact area of their day where they're all together interacting. And they found that they had these daily huddles. If you're in healthcare, you probably know about this. These weekly, daily huddles where people typically start the huddle by saying, here's what's wrong clinically in every room, go have a great shift. Uh, but what researchers did is they had the clinical lead do a green, yellow, red check-in. Green was, it means you're content, you're in flow, you're able to be present. Yellow means you're a little bit offline, there's some things pulling at your attention. And red means you're burnt out, you're reactive. It's difficult to be present. They had the clinical lead just do a green, yellow, red check-in. Then they had another group that they didn't do anything for. They just let them go on their task-based huddles every week. They measured them for 6 months. The groups that did the green, yellow, red check-in, the energy check-in, reported lower burnout, higher engagement, and then had objectively 2 points higher on patient satisfaction scores than the group that did not do this check-in. This has since been replicated in many other different settings. And one of the reasons why the researchers went in and said, hey, what's going on here? And all of the nurses said, we're just having better conversations in our break room. What doing a check-in like this does is it gives you the data to be compassionate, to see people. For example, if Anna and I did a check-in, if Anna is a red, Anna and I jump on our next virtual meeting together, do you think I'm going to open up a tab and answer another email and just hope Anna figures her red out on her own? Or am I more likely to be like, Anna, I noticed you're a red. What's going on? Anything I can do to help? Or imagine if Anna was a red in a check-in, and do you think that day is the day that I'm going to debate a project she's working on in front of everybody else at the team meeting? Probably not, because now I know that she's a red. We can't lead people we don't understand, right? And emotions are data. You don't have to do this green, yellow, red check-in, but you should have some way of regularly checking in on the energy of the people you lead. One of my clients is a large airline. One of the things that I love doing is when I'm in the gate area, I love when the pilot puts on the vest and checks the plane. I don't know why, it just makes me feel better. But I called someone that I had worked with at the airline and I said, hey, who checks the pilot every day? And they couldn't answer me. We tend to have systems to check on the processes, the technology, the controls in our organizations, but we don't have systems and practices to check on how the people are that are responsible for those things. So find some way to check in on how people are doing. And then finally, the more closely you see somebody, the more complex they become. The more closely you see anything, the more complex they become. And the more data you have around people's struggles, what they may be going through, some repeated struggles. And this allows you to be proactively compassionate. So for so long, leaders have been taught to be empathetic, but empathy is seeking to understand and feel what somebody else is feeling. That can lead to an empathy spiral. I recommend rational compassion, where you're able to anticipate people's struggles because you've asked about it. You know when they're struggling in a particular work cycle or the cycle of a quarter or a month or a project cycle. You can actually think, what are the actions and resources I have to alleviate that struggle when I see the signs of that struggle? And it helps us to be rationally compassionate. And just small actions can make a big difference. I was coaching a leader who had everybody do a check-in, and one person just said, hey, I'm overloaded. And instead of saying, hey, everybody is, that's just the industry right now, he said, hey, you know that meeting we have on Friday? In front of everybody, he said this. Why don't you take that to get caught up? Everybody on the call relaxed. Because when someone shows compassion to us, it's one of the key ways we feel that we matter. So I believe that all leaders should be able to observe, note, and share back details of people's work. People need to feel remembered. We should be able to ask meaningful questions. That is a skill. Check in on people's emotions and energy. Listen for total meaning. When people respond, instead of just listening to their words, really digging into the meaning behind the words. If someone on a Zoom call, for example, if you're a remote worker, if someone's frustrated, instead of just clicking leave and waiting to your meeting next week to see them again, and you notice that they were frustrated, give them a call and say, hey, I noticed you were frustrated on that call. Is that right? These little in between moments of interactions can help people feel heard. Um, if you have a conversation last week, think of your conversations from this week since it's Friday. What's something you want to remember to follow up on with somebody? Right now, just write it down. This afternoon, call them and say, hey, I was thinking about our conversation earlier this week. I just want to follow up on how you were doing on this point, and watch what happens to your relationship. There are a few things more powerful than knowing that our presence and absence means something to just one other person, that someone's thinking about us when we're not there. And then practice proactive compassion. So the big individual and organizational question here is, who do we need to notice more? Who do we need to see more? And what can I do and what can our organization do to help them feel more seen? And I spend the most time on this one because when we notice people, we start to see their uniqueness, and that allows us to affirm them. Real affirmation is showing someone how their uniqueness makes a unique difference. Very important to differentiate appreciation and recognition. Again, recognition platforms are great. Symbols of recognition through awards are great. The recognition software industry has grown to a $19 billion market right now, projected to be $50 billion in 2035. Yet people report feeling more undervalued than ever. So what's going on? It's important to understand that affirmation is different than appreciation or recognition. Appreciation is showing general gratitude for someone's role, who someone is. Recognition is showing gratitude for what someone does. Affirmation is showing them how their specific gifts make a specific impact. You can give some a symbol, an appreciation week to recognize them or appreciate them. You can give someone a perk or an award to recognize them, but those are symbols of value. They can't actually value another person. Only people value people. So one of the things I think that's going on is organizations have invested a lot in symbols of value in the absence of the daily experience of feeling valued. And affirmation goes further. It's specific and it shows a specific impact. If you scroll up, you can see in the initial chat, people talked about how people recognize their specific gifts. So there are two sides of affirmation, two skill sets, right? Being able to name someone's unique gifts and being able to show them how they make a unique difference. I'll start with the latter, showing them how they make a unique difference. You have to show people proof of impact to affirm them. I got to work with the National Park Service, and there was a maintenance supervisor who supervises a large team in a park in the West. And he had incredibly high morale, low turnover. And these are difficult jobs, right? It's a maintenance profession in a very hostile environment in a rural area. And I asked what he did, and he held up his phone and he told me, I take pictures. I go around the park and take pictures every week. So if there's visitors walking over a bridge that my team repaired, I take a picture. If there was a shorter line for a bathroom because a bathroom was repaired and was reopened, I take a picture. If there are people using a new trail, I take a picture. And he told me every Friday morning he sends them an email. And the subject line is just, look what you did. And he just attaches the photos. And I love that because he told me, he goes, my people can't argue that they matter to me. I give them photographic proof. That's what affirmation is. Affirmation is giving someone proof, evidence of their actual significance. One of the things that we can do is to collect and tell stories of the impact people make and exactly how they make it. Another way to do this is in how we say thank you or good job. So instead of just saying thank you or good job, leaders who tend to show people that they matter go beyond and show people the difference they make and exactly how they make it. There are four components that people typically describe that make their thank yous meaningful. You may have seen this in the chat. The leader describes when and where it occurred. They're very specific. They're not the leader that just says thank you at 1 o'clock every day. They describe the specific actions and behaviors the person used so that person can name them. They name their unique gifts that the person brought to that situation, and then they describe their impact. They tell that story of the impact that what they did and how it had on them or others. And it doesn't have to be big. It doesn't have to be an end user all the time or a client or a customer. It can be, hey, the way that you synthesized people's opinions in that meeting really demonstrated your creativity last week. And I noticed this week that the team was more collaborative with one another. I just want to say thank you. Right? It's much different than saying, hey, good job at that meeting. It gives people the evidence of their significance, so they start believing they're significant. The root of the word affirm is affirmare, and it means to firm up or make stronger. So when you show someone the evidence of their significance, you're actually making their belief in their significance stronger, and which is why it lasts much longer than a symbol of value when somebody actually experiences the everyday experience of being valued. There are four gifts that you can name within that framework, or just you can spot in your people. Everybody brings us their gifts, their strengths, what they love to do and what they're good at. Everybody brings us their purpose, the unique impact they make on a team, what's lost when they're gone. Everybody brings us their perspective, and everybody brings us their wisdom, what only they can teach us. One of my favorite questions to ask someone is, what's something only you can teach me? What's something that only you can teach our team? Um, I had a coach who once said to me, and he noticed something about me that I didn't notice in myself. And he said, Zach, you can't read the label when you're inside the jar. And I loved that because it gives us a picture of the power of an other, of we are that other to someone else that reflects back to people what they don't see in themselves. And being able to name these gifts and the impact someone makes, you're giving them a reflected appraisal that adds to their belief bank that they're worthy and they're important. And now there's someone here being like, Zach, well, I have underperformers. How can I show people that they matter when people are not performing? You're making a false dichotomy. We actually show people that they matter so that they can improve their performance. David Yeager, educational psychologist, one of my favorite psychologists, he's found that critique on its own rarely works. And HBR, there's an article in Harvard Business Review, did a research on thousands of incidences of performance improvement feedback. They actually found that about 39% of performance improvement feedback actually decreases performance over time. One of the reasons why is the researchers found that the people getting the feedback didn't feel seen, heard, valued, and understood by the person giving the feedback. David Yeager says we often critique before we care. And there are three elements of critique that actually moves the needle on performance. It's when that critique is accompanied by belief in the other person. I believe in you. I believe in the impact you can make here. When that person is affirmed, I know that you have these strengths, that you are very creative. I rely on you for that. And when you offer your support, and I'm here to help. And you know what? I want to check in at 8 o'clock every Tuesday for a 5-minute call to see what I can remove, what barriers I can remove to help you achieve that goal. Researchers find when these elements are present, critique works. But the problem is we often critique before we care. We often expect people to improve their performance before we demonstrate our support. Finally, and is the things people actually do, the tasks people do. And so when you think about that picture of the bridge being repaired, right, that's the significance of the work. Task significance is so important to experiencing mattering. So as you think about the things people do, make sure before you tell them what to do, how to do it, or when to do it by, you show them why it matters. They should be able to describe the significance of whatever it is that they're spending their incredibly rare existence on. They should be able to describe the necessity of the work, and they should be reminded of how they use their strengths to do it. So let's look at these skills areas before we close out with the needing practice. All leaders, I think, should be able to collect and tell stories of significance. We should be able to give people proof of impact. We should be able to know, name, and nurture people's unique gifts, give them meaningful gratitude. When we critique, we should be able to show them the difference that they make, to show them that we're there for them. We should be able to communicate significance of all tasks. And the big question here is think about who around you needs to more clearly see how they add value. Is it someone 3, 4 steps removed from an end impact that you see as a leader? Is it an employee group? If you're not working in an organization right now and you're on your own, is it a client that you need to remind them how you rely on them? Is it a family member, a friend? All of this stuff transcends the workplace. This is a quintessential human experience of feeling that we matter. And then the more we feel noticed, the more we feel affirmed, the more we feel needed. So feeling needed is feeling essential, feeling relied on. I love the chat that someone said, I got called into a meeting that I really didn't like belong there, but they wanted my voice there. My voice was needed there. Treating people essential is important. Human beings are interdependent. What interdependent really means is relied on by one another. And the truth is, psychologically, when people feel replaceable, they will act replaceable. Max Ringelmann, a French agricultural engineer in 1913, did a study with students. He had the individuals pull on a rope as hard as they could. He attached that rope to a dynamometer. It's a little device that measures force, how hard they're pulling. And then he got those individual students and put them into groups and he had them pull on a rope together as hard as they could, and he measured total force readings. And what he found every time was that the individuals exerted more total force than the groups, which is paradoxical. And why is that? It's because the individuals knew that their efforts were indispensable. It's called perceived indispensability of effort. We have had this like trope, don't forget that you're replaceable at work, for a long time, but it's antithetical to everything we know about human beings and human psychology. Yes, jobs and skills can be replaced, but humans and their unique gifts, the unique impact they bring to a team, their unique perspective, wisdom, strengths cannot be replaced. And one way to show people the difference they make is to actually show them measurably how they're needed. You've likely heard the story. It's a fun story to tell. When John F. Kennedy was launching the Apollo missions, he saw a janitor. He said, "Hey, what do you do here?" And the janitor very calmly said, "Oh, I'm putting a person on the moon," and went back to his work. Well, Andrew Carton at the Wharton School did a archival study of NASA during that time. And let me just paint the management challenge for NASA. NASA had over 300,000 contract workers, many of whom would not be contracted with NASA when they met this goal that no one thought that they could achieve, which was to put a person on the moon by the end of the decade to advance science. You have truck drivers transporting goods, you have engineers, you have physicists, you have astronauts, you have seamstresses sewing lunar lander parachutes. How do you get all of these people to see how they're needed to something so far down the line? Well, what Carton found was that on the blackboards at NASA and on meeting minutes, there was this ladder to the moon that was written for each work group. At the bottom was the work group's tasks. At the next rung up was a tangible, measurable objective that that task would make possible and was necessary for. The next rung up was a tangible, measurable objective that that task was needed for, all the way up to putting a person on the moon by the end of the decade to advance science. They didn't tell people that they mattered. They showed people exactly how they mattered. They showed them measurably how they were needed for someone else, for something else, or someone else. This is a technique called laddering that we find that people who show people how they matter do. Whether it's drawing the ladder or communicating the ladder, it's making sure people measurably see how they're needed. So, a one phrasing that you can use right now is to just think of someone you're relied on and that you rely on, and say to them, if it wasn't for you. If it wasn't for you, this wouldn't be possible. Uh, and just using those words and just reminding somebody that their presence makes something better and different is powerful to restoring that sense of mattering and commitment. So again, the three areas: noticed, affirmed, and needed. Right now, what I want to do is, as we close here, I just want you to reflect on what we've talked about. I'm going to launch a poll, if I can get that up here. And I just want to know where you're at. So um, let's see here. Oh, I've already put it up. Someone already, we did that. So which practice area did you most want to develop? I guess I kept it up the whole time. That's good. Thanks for answering the poll. So here's what we found here. I'll share the results with you. You can see that noticing, affirming, and then needing, showing people how they're needed, was something that we all wanted to develop. One of the things that you'll see in the chat is you will see a link to a PDF that I've provided. There's a self-assessment there. Some people say, Zach, what do I do next? I encourage you to take that self-assessment on all the behaviors we talked about today. And then I encourage you to think about which area you want to improve upon and what's an action that you can take. Have your leaders or fellow leaders or peers take the assessment and talk about it with one another. And then I'll leave you with this question to ask everybody in your life that's been incredibly powerful for leaders. A lot of times, and this came up in the chat with some questions, but a lot of times people experience how they want to feel noticed, affirmed, and needed in different ways, depending on potentially generation or experience or personality type. This question can really help you get to the core of what we're talking about today. When you feel that you matter to me, what am I doing? Right? Ask this question of your people. Ask this question of the people around you. When you feel that you matter to me, what am I doing? Write those things down and do more of those things. So thank you for your attention, your engagement. I love all the chatter in the chat. I'm going to turn it over to Anna. We'll get to some of your questions.
Thank you so much, Zach. We had a lot of engagement on the questions, and just a reminder to everyone that this presentation will be shared with all the resources, how you can get in touch with Zach, how you can find his book and the articles he wrote. So definitely lots of resources for you available. Just because we're short of time, and I want to make a comment. especially now, Zach, I think what you're talking about, even though you referred specifically to organizations, and that's what's relevant to our audience here, it really applies to society. It applies
Mm,
at a much greater scale, especially today when we feel so divided and separated and alien to each other. So a couple of questions I pulled out of the Q&A that are interesting. One is about gender differences,
hmm
which kind of apply across the board. Are there different needs for mattering affirmation that you see, in broader categories like gender, but also individual differences? Some people are so intrinsically motivated that they don't necessarily need as much, and we know many examples of that, that affirmation is important, but they're self-driven. How do you see
mm.
those individual differences? And a specific question was about gender differences.
Yeah, I mean that's why I really like the data gathering questions of when you feel that you matter to me, when you feel that you matter here, what are we doing? And what is happening here? What is happening around you? Because the situational contextual factors can definitely change how much people need to feel that they matter and offer different barriers for people to feel that they matter. For example, we've heard a number of times, and there's a number of studies on this, that women who are mothers, for example, may feel a lack of mattering in personal life that filters over into work. So when somebody goes on maternity leave, for example, there's been some narrative studies that find that if someone just says, "Hey, we'll see you back here in 3 months," and it provides no indication that their absence is missed, that their strengths, their perspectives are missed, then that can actually reinforce this cycle of what psychologist Gordon Fleck calls anti-mattering. So I encourage everybody to think about the situational factors, the contextual barriers, the identity-based barriers that produce more barriers to people feeling that they matter than others. I would say yes, some people are more intrinsically motivated than others, but even in the research on mattering, you see people find their sense of adding value differently. So that, oh, I could see the difference that my effort made. Someone showed me that. So someone may more want to feel affirmed or feel needed or see how their work makes a difference if they're more intrinsically motivated than someone who, for example, is more relationally motivated and wants to develop a sense of mattering through those close relationships. So that's why I think the contextual, the situational is all important. But we have to go deeper than like engagement data, engagement surveys to get that. We have to really ask people when you feel that you matter what's happening. So it's a great question.
Yeah, and you're following up on that and building on that. It sounds to me like even though we're talking about data, we're really looking at a much broader set of variables that are
Mm-hmm.
qualitative and not just quantitative.
Yes,
And that
yes.
relates to the question, which I think is excellent from Javier here, who is saying, how do we avoid the trap of making it just another metric
Uh-huh.
that becomes divorced from the actual human experience?
Yeah, and that's why I think that you can't really platform your way out of this. Like a lot of people try to deploy this at impersonal digital level. You have to start, fostering the motivation and the commitment to do this for people. People have to experience mattering for themselves and deeply understand it to invest in it. One of the first things I start with an organization or leaders is I ask them to think about when they've most felt that they matter to another person here in this work. What was that person doing? Have them actually write down those skills and then say, that is what we're trying to do. We're trying to help you be that person for other people. And I think you have to have that emotional anchor to develop that intrinsic motivation to do this for the right reasons. I also think you have to set the right intention that we're not doing this just so people produce more. We're doing this because people are an end in themselves. People will feel when something's done as a tactic. Barry Waymiller, Bob Chapman at Barry Waymiller, has a great case study of this. And he says that, we're doing this to send people home better. The byproducts are, we all know, they're people more energized when they feel heard and they feel seen, but we have to set the right intention. And the third is that there has to be a close connection between the people and the leader in how it's measured. I encourage leaders to do self-assessments on the frequency of behaviors, but then I encourage team members to do self-assessments on the frequency of their behaviors and their leaders and invite them to talk. at least quarterly, on what we can do to help make sure people are feeling seen and heard and valued there. And that's what takes this out of just the programmatic and makes it relational, which is what it is at its core. It's a great question.
And to build on that, I think it's very important what you said about kind of divorcing it from becoming a platform or yet another metric,
Yeah.
because it seems that's the default position of a lot of HR and leadership in organizations saying, "Oh, we just brought this vendor, including WorkHuman, right? We just brought this
Yes,
vendor.
absolutely.
We're
Yep.
plugging this in. Check the
Yeah.
box." So
Yeah.
who owns mattering? Now is a very good general question. Who owns mattering in organizations?
Individuals with the interactional power. This is what's hard about mattering. And nobody likes my work because, well, people like my work, but it's hard because it takes individuals to make the choice to show up in daily interactions. For example, you can have a vendor that's giving someone a symbol of value. But if someone gets this big symbol of value and then they go into an experience every day where they're overlooked by their manager or the people around them, that's their culture. Culture is the accumulation of interactions. So the real charge for the modern organization, I think, is to look at examining the interactional level of organizations. And are people equipped with the skills to do this? So less than 2% of the world's population, for example, gets any formal education on how to listen well. We're losing the social reps, the community ties, the community ties we used to have to learn these skills before we got into manager positions. And now we have managers, many of whom have lacked the social reps to develop the skills to care. And they're in environments that make it hard for them to do so. So I think that one of the things we have to look is at the interactional level, do people have the skills to do this? Are people developing those skills? Are they evaluated on those skills? And I think that this is going to take a real radical transformation of how we view leadership. I think we need to view leadership as a separate occupation that requires a separate set of skills. The baseline skills is that I think the minimum qualification for a leader has to be to see, hear, value people so that you can regenerate the energy needed to pursue some bigger purpose. So a skills-based approach, I think, is incredibly important that starts with emotionally anchoring people in the concept. Um, and you can develop systems that express this commitment publicly, that say, as a person here, you should experience feeling noticed, affirmed, and needed. I don't think anybody would argue with that. Here's the behaviors you can expect from the people around you. Here's the behaviors that you'll commit to, and here's how we'll help you learn how to do these things.
And that's such an excellent point. Zach, so many questions, so many thoughts. I think me personally and everyone else here, we should commit to doing something different after this conversation. Because again, in the social context today, all of this matters so much. And I really want to thank you for making the time, joining us at NYU again virtually. And I'm sure we will have you back at some point. Keep us appraised of your work, your next project. And thank you so much again.
Yeah, thank you, Anna.
Just a quick reminder that our next and final Rethinking Work Series is coming in December. We are going to be talking about the structure of jobs, a little bit more analytical, on December 2nd with Ben Zweig. And I would love to see you all back here again for further discussions about what matters and how we're rethinking work. Thank you all and have a great weekend. Bye-bye.